Whenever I think about Craig and the Slime Factory, it made me think that the 5th season, if it wasn't cut in half, we would have seen the return of the Slime Factory and the Slime Kids themselves. Because it just makes me think there was a Slime Factory in the creek, which makes the creek much more bigger, and this building is fully functional in comparison to the other places in the creek. Well, it's taking place in the outdoors, while some indoors when it comes to trees and mostly caves. I'm really getting the impression that the creek is far more bigger when it comes to places like this. And even though that I'm maybe over-exaggerating if this is taking place in a different location, but this is all taking place in the forest. And it's weird thinking that there's a building without a parking lot, and in one of the rooms it's mostly an indoor pool or resort of some sort, a water park. This just raises more questions, but to cut to the chase, I really feel like this episode is a demonstration on not only doing the parody of the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but mainly the fact that they want to do different techniques when it comes to slime, which has nothing to do with Nickelodeon. Anyway, Craig and the kids got their slime tickets to go to the Slime Factory, and Craig and JP saying, "I got a golden ticket," but with different lyrics. Like, it's really obvious that they're parodying Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it's no surprise that they're really changing their lyrics in order to suit the whole Slime Factory theme. They encountered Carl, who he promises to do the rest of the science homework if they get the Slime Kids' top secret recipe. Even though the way they state it, it's odd considering that they don't eat slime, they touch slime, but regardless, this episode really loves parodying the film from 1971. Upon arrival, they meet Uwe, who is the Willy Wonka of this episode. And similar to the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, they go to different places, and this leads to JP and Kelsey getting into situations. The only difference is that they're not selfish, and they're too obsessive towards slime in the Slime Factory. Even though that people have witnessed this trope multiple times when it comes to a character falling out from the group, up until the final characters are saved without doing anything, mainly Charlie and his grandpa. I really feel like that if this episode was 22 minutes longer, then other characters would have been part of this, but since it's just mostly Craig, his friends, and Omar, it really feels like that this episode doesn't really need to try too hard. The two scenes involving JP and Kelsey falling out of the group when it comes to their obsession with slime, I really feel like that they really wanted to do a lot more ideas, but considering that the size of the building isn't as big, it kind of makes sense on how it's structured the way it is for how little we get when it comes to the predicaments that JP and Kelsey got themselves into. Then again, I really feel like that this entire episode centering around slime is mainly a different version in comparison to the Chocolate Factory from the Willy Wonka film. Like, knowing full well that these characters are also trying to find the cubes from Kenneth that they've been searching throughout this entire season. What does Uwe and Kenneth have in common when it comes to the cube that Uwe has? Like, even though that they're separated when it comes to different locations where the characters need to find one of the cubes, how did Uwe found a cube, and at some point he found the one that he needs the cube the most in order to succeed their plan for the Heart of the Forest miniseries in season 5. I really feel like that even though that Ui is familiar with Craig for him saving the Queek from Capture the Flag miniseries, but the way I see it, it just makes me feel like that they really took more liberty on making this a parody of Willy Wonka, rather than understanding the purpose of this specific cube that Ui had throughout this entire time. Granted, it's not a problem, but whenever I look at it, it makes me feel like that the Queek itself had multiple questions when it comes to how the cubes were separated, and thinking about this specific cube, it just makes me feel like that Kenneth just probably had a different life running the Queek while going to this location, and then Ui turned it into a slime factory. I mean, with these informations in mind, I really feel like that having an episode involving the origins of the slime factory isn't needed, but somewhat nice to understand what really happened in this building, since it really feels like the odd one in comparison to the multiple locations from the Queek. Anyway, the top secret recipe that Kara needed is the ever-sticking slime gobble, and it's floating in the air with magnets underneath, and it really makes me feel like that anything is possible, because after witnessing the many things happening in this episode when it comes to JP and Kelsey's situation, it really feels like that everything is mostly magical and imaginary, because that's one of the things that really glared on me without reason or not enjoying this show as the other cartoons, but just by watching this episode alone, this isn't jumping the shark, but it made me convinced that this show is half magic and half imaginary when it comes to the Queek characters. Even if I wasn't expecting much from this episode, it made me convinced that there are two things happening in this show, and it's not fooling me in the slightest. Like, it may be imaginary 80% of the time, but when it comes to the 20%, I really feel like that if what really happened out of imaginary is Craig just touching the slime, rather than having the slime magnet towards his keys, then I really feel like that it would have been structured poorly. And for how the "you lose, good day" so scene has been executed similar to that from the Willy Wonka film, they clearly wanted this whole thing to work out when it comes to the logic of Craig of the Queek. Believe me, the logic in this isn't as bad in comparison to the other logics from other cartoons, but it's still glaring, just not too problematic. This episode is something else. Like, it does a good job on parodying Willy Wonka and the scenes and dialogues, but I'm not that much of a fan of Willy Wonka as much as everyone else, even if I watched that film once in a while. And just by watching this episode, when it comes to how it's structured, when I say it's something else, it really feels like that I'm supposed to be into these types of ideals that I enjoyed in the past, but sometimes when you enjoy stuff in the past, you're just not into it when you're into different material, because I used to enjoy Tom and Jerry, but now I don't. But to be fair, I actually enjoy the slime characters, including Louie. So, even though that there isn't going to be a chance that he's going to return in the 5th season when it comes to the remaining episodes, I really feel like that he really did a great impression, and for making this episode good by his energy. He isn't like Willy Wonka, but when it comes to his own character, he's entertaining. Even if I still didn't watch the final episode of Season 4 along with the Heart of the Forest miniseries, including Jessica's Little Big World, it doesn't really matter if I catch up, because the day this show comes to an end, it's no longer gonna be the original Cartoon Network show. It could be the last original Cartoon Network show that Cartoon Network had created, but knowing full well that This is the only original cartoon that they have at the moment. This show doesn't feel lonely when it comes to the situation that Cartoon Network is in right now. Besides, I can't guarantee it will happen, but I might do an analysis video of Capture the Flag and The Heart of the Forest into one video, since they're the only two miniseries of Craiggy the Creek. Granted, it's gonna be weird since that both miniseries don't have similarities with each other, but the more I think about it, I might do a Summerpalooza 6 marathon centering around Craiggy the Creek next year, but then again, it's depending on how I feel, and since I have completed everything on setting up Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon, it could never happen, or just making it a month rather than a marathon. Like I said, I don't know what's going to happen next year since I haven't planned everything and it's still too early to think about it, but I've completed Summerpalooza 5 way ahead of time, and if I'm going to do the same thing with Craiggy the Creek, I'm probably going to deal with the same problems as before, but that just depends on how I feel when I make my before I make my 2025 plans video later this year. With that being said, I'm giving this episode a 7.25 out of 10.